Hey, what's up everybody? Ali After back with a brand new video. Today I want to talk about late payments. A lot of people have been coming to me, emailing me about late payments, asking me what's the best way to get rid of those late payments. Today I want to address that, but more importantly I want to address it in a way that makes sense for you. The most important thing to understand when it comes to late payments is the frequency of how late you are. So there's key points that I think we need to address when it comes to late payments that a lot of people forget. The most important thing about late payments, right? A lot of people think, hey, just send a goodwill letter and that will do the trick. And the reality is a goodwill letter is just not enough. And the reason I say that is because I've personally seen a lot of customers come to me and say, Ali, I'm going to try to use a goodwill letter and hopefully the late payments goes away. And by the time they send the goodwill letter, they wait a few weeks, they get a response back from the credit bureaus. And guess what? The same late payments is still there. It actually says the status has been updated to reflect a more accurate reflection of that item in your credit report, and that can actually be more hurtful than good when it comes to your personal credit. So what do you do and how do you go about fixing this issue? Because a lot of people have been coming to try to figure out a way to get rid of those late payments, and there's a lot of factors to really understand when it comes to this, and there's a lot of factors that actually go into this to be careful about when it comes to late payments, that is, right? So I think that you have to understand one key point here, and that is that when it comes to accounts with your creditors, with the credit bureaus, you don't necessarily have an item that can be 1 day late, 2 day late, 5 days late, 10 days late, let's say even 15 days late. The default setting is 30 days late. So that's one thing that actually does hurt you quite a bit. Now, there are ways to kind of handle those late payments if you address them correctly. And I think that you need to really try to figure out what specific situation you were put in when that late payment happened, because a lot of people tend to forget. They think that it's easy just because it's a late payment and you can just go ahead and dispute that. And there's actually a lot of letters out there on the internet that has been saying, hey, Ali, I found this letter on the internet, section 604 or whatever the case, and I've sent that letter, but the late payment is whatever, it's coming back, or section 611 or whatever the case, right? Even the section 609 for that matter. The issue there is you're actually disputing it. And the issue with the disputes is that it's an open platform. The creditor can simply say it's been verified, it's accurate, and it is reflecting accurately in your credit report. And there's nothing you can do about that. The best thing you can do when it comes to these late payments is understand the situations you were put in, how come it was considered a late payment in the first place, and what triggered it to go late, right? And remember, the golden rule here is that traditionally the late payments on your credit reports are the 30-day standard. It's by the 30-day interval. They don't necessarily have any other denominations. So just on that alone, there's a lot of things that we can work with, right? So that's the first thing I want you to really pay attention to. So there's a lot of situations that can happen due to late payments, right? Like for example, you might have something on your credit cards, you're carrying a certain type of balance, but you respected your late payments and all of a sudden there was a surcharge that was added, right? So just for a few extra dollars, your payment status went into a late payment. And the reason I say that is because there are certain different types of dates. There's a statement date, there's a billing date, and so on and so forth. The objective is to always be careful with that, because those dates, they fluctuate, and when they do, and you're thinking, I got a couple of more days before I pay my bill, that can actually cause it to have surcharges fall into your credit report, and ultimately causing it to go late. And the reason I say that is because accounting-wise, as soon as you get your billing statement or the statement from the creditor, that is the date that you should start considering paying a little bit of the balance down. And the reason I say that, even if it's the minimum payment, is because then you don't have those surcharges added by default, just because there are certain delays in the payment processing of your creditor, which hence, ends up being that they got to push it into a 30-day late payment, which by default with the credit bureaus, there's nothing less than that, right? So you got to start to figure out what are some of the processes and procedures that you can use when it comes to this. And what I mean by that is, for instance, if it is because of surcharges, but you know for a fact you paid on time and you have proof of that and you have evidence of that, the next best thing to do is contact the creditor and say, look, I paid my bills on time. Forget the goodwill stuff. That only works if you have an established credit history and you have $100,000 or more in your bank account and you're a good account holder with those banks, and they have a lot of tremendous private VIP services they offer to you. And once in a while, they'll work with you on that one. But outside of that, the goodwill back in the days was very effective. Creditors was very empathetic towards your situation, and they used to give you a break, and you can get away with that, right? There was no issues there. But nowadays, you really have to be cautious on how you go about approaching that goodwill situation, because that actually might not work for you. So hence the reason I say that look into the surcharges. That's the first thing you can do. Contest that with the creditors. explain to them the situation that you paid your bills on time and that it actually is reflecting in a very negative way to the credit bureaus. And the fact that there's a standard 30-day late, but in fact, it's a couple of days, and that can be considered due to the fact those surcharges were added. So that's the first thing I think you need to really tackle with your creditors, to understand the specification of your situation at the time that the account went into late and for what specific reasons, whether surcharges were added or just an account balance was just pushed forward because of the statement date and billing dates. That is one way to tackle that, right? So use the Fair Credit Billing Act instead of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, because in those instances, remember, the credit reporting agencies, what they're simply doing is reporting information that has been submitted to them by these creditors. So if it's, if these creditors are basically putting together information about you as a consumer, and hundreds of files are submitted on a regular basis to these credit reporting agencies by creditors, then it is their fiduciary duty to report, because they have an agreement with the credit reporting agency to, number one, report information that is 100% accurate, which between us, we know that it's very rare to see that. And number two, it has to be consistent. So the reason for consistency is because, the creditors have to pull credit on a regular basis, which in turn creates profit for the credit reporting agency, but also at the same time, they have to have accounts that are active and they have to report on a regular basis. So that's what we call a batch processing of those reports on a monthly basis. So, use the Fair Credit Billing Act, because that is the creditor's duty to fix and adjust those accounts. And the reason I say that is because, let's assume you were frequently late and it basically pushed it into a 30-day late, but by default, like I said, because they don't have that standard 10, 15 or whatever the case days. And that can actually be a very dangerous situation for you, because your late payment, right? The late payment that shows up on the credit reports, we know that the payment structure is a 35% composition of your credit score. It's one of the biggest reasons why your payment history is so critical to maintain, in a good standing. So communicate with your creditors the understanding of that knowledge. And also at the same time, like I said, use the Fair Credit Billing Act, because that is the best weapon you can use. And by standard, explain to them that whether, this information that is essentially holding you back from getting a positive credit history, what was the specific reasons as to why it was put into a late status? Like I said, was it surcharges? Was it a couple of days late? Was it just information that didn't add up? Did the bank delay on their side to pay because of a payment holiday or something like that, right? So there's so many different issues, but you need to address that, okay? Also, the frequency of your late accounts, just be careful there, because if you're frequently late, that letter might not be as effective. It's almost like abusing the entire goodwill letter situation. But instead, this time, you actually have the reality of the matter, and you're trying to use it in a sense that okay, well, this is what it is. I'm going to dispute it with the creditor. I'm going to try to challenge it with the creditor directly, because it is true that they don't have a 5, 10, or 15-day late. And it is true that there are certain charges that could have been added to your account by the time you paid your bill on time, way before schedule, but yet it was just posted late, and that could be an issue there as well. So accounting wise, that can be rectified with the creditor. But if you're frequently late, right? If you're, let's say, every couple of months you're late on a regular basis, and at that point you try to take all those dates and you try to fight it, they do have records of that, and the consideration towards making those adjustments might be much more complicated and more difficult. So I'll be careful there with that as well. So with that, let's continue on the situation where a lot of people say, well, Ali, I have quite a bit of accounts, and also at the same time, I have some accounts that are active, some accounts that are closed. What's the ramification and the consequences of trying to adjust that late payment? What if the account gets removed, right? So here's the situation with that as well. So let's assume you have an account that's active and it's open, and you're dealing with the credit reporting agencies and you're dealing with a creditor. And let's assume you're using the FCBA strategy that I just described and explaining to the creditor that you did pay your bills on time. Hence, there was a couple of days of delay due to the banking processing. Yet, there is no standard 10, 15, or 5-day business, days late. Rather, the credit bureaus go by the default of 30 days. And that could have been the tool you would have used. So let's assume you use that, but for some reason, something happened and the account comes off your credit report. What do? So assuming it's an active account, I wouldn't worry as much, because what happens now is, because it is an active account, the next month over again, it's going to report automatically. So that's the good thing about that. But let's assume it was an account that had a lot of history and you had just a bit of late payments towards the very end, and it was a closed account. And let's assume you tried the strategy. However, at that point, the creditor decides to take the account off, or let's say the bureaus decide to knock it off. What happens now? In those instances, it is a little bit more difficult to get the account back up. However, what I would do is I wouldn't try to go ahead and write a letter, but rather communicate with them vis-a-vis phone, try to get that account back up. And I would try at least a couple of days in a row if you're not getting the right response, because you will get kicked around, because these creditors don't necessarily have a dedicated department in terms of ensuring that these closed accounts are reviewed properly and they're reflected properly. Rather, they focus a whole lot more on activities of consistently trying to look at the active accounts, right? So I would phone call, I'd have a phone conversation with some agents in the creditor's side. Let's assume the account was completely taken off your credit report because you challenged the late payments. And then I would try to, have a phone conversation to try to bring it back up, at which point, you'll have a tremendous amount of success, I believe, strongly on that one. So those are some of the things I really wanted to share with you guys when it comes to late payments. Really, there's no default standard template that I can offer you. It's all based on your situation. You have to factually analyze your credit. You have to understand, what the situation is, how it is, comprised, what caused some of the accounts to go late. You know your history better than anybody else. Nobody from the internet can give you advice on what to do, because you have that relationship established with the creditor. But the best way to go ahead and tackle that effectively is to follow the strategies that I just described to you in reference to thinking outside of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, but rather dealing with the creditors directly. And, based on the notion that there is no specific times that you can have 5, 10, or even 15 days late, but rather by default, as we discussed, the creditor bureaus have a 30-day to 60 or 90-day, every 30-day increments. So that could be a very huge weapon and tool to take advantage of when it comes to fixing those late payments. So I encourage you guys to try that out. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Let me ask you this. Do you have a specific question about what I shared with you today? If so, ask me below this video in the comment section of this video. Leave a comment with a question in reference to what I just shared with you today. If you really enjoyed thoroughly what I shared with you today, go ahead and share this video with those that you feel could benefit from this knowledge base that I just shared with you guys. And don't forget, if you haven't subscribed, don't forget to subscribe, turn the notifications on to all. So every time there's videos like these, you'll be the first to know. And with that said, my friends, this is Ali Tarafter. I'll definitely catch you guys on the next one. Bye for now.